And I'll call this meeting of the Facilities Committee for the Board of Education to order. All three board members are present. And take a motion to approve the agenda. Second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, and I'm not seeing any public comments. And that will take us to the November referendum planning process, with the first part being the community survey.
Thank you, Dave. As you recall at the board meeting, we got to this topic a little bit late. We didn't get to this till about 10 o'clock, so we talked about a good way for board members to be able to provide some input into this topic would be to send it to the facility committee meeting, so we'd have an opportunity to talk about it in a little in-depth manner. Kelsey, was that Bill who joined us on the Zoom? Okay. So I just want to introduce some of the folks that are on the Zoom or in the room who've been working on the survey. Behind me, we have Andy from EUA, who's been a part of the process. We have Jay and Eric from Vogel who've been a part of the process. And on the Zoom, on the screen right now is Bill Foster. Bill is the constructor of the survey and leads our discussion on this topic, as well as Robin and Chris from EUA are also joining us on the Zoom. So anyone who has been helping us to put this together is welcome to answer any questions that come up or provide feedback for the board members. So that's the team that's been working on this. We do have a draft that's labeled draft number 20 that we did put into your board book. After the last board meeting, we did receive some comments from a couple board members. As an example, Dave identified that in the prior survey that we shared with the community for the 2014 referendum, that there was a question about communication preferences. Dave valued that feedback from the community. Bill agreed and said that's a really good question. That's one he likes to ask. And so we reworked the survey a little bit and inserted that question. Second thing, Joan, you had feedback for me on the operational referendum question. There were 4 questions, and the third and the fourth question were similar in nature. So we combined that into one question. So if you don't mind, I just would want to just take a quick tour of the survey as far as what's on each page, and then open it up so that any board members who have questions or comments are welcome to do it. And then we'll try to have the appropriate person jump in from the team that's putting this together. So I'm going to open up the one that's called draft 20, because this is the most recent example. And we're just going to walk through this just quickly at a high level. Page 1 is really just an overall introduction and how to take the survey in one of 2 ways. We did get an opportunity to have Bill clarify with us how the survey actually works. And so we can cover that if any board members have any questions about how will someone receive it, and what if there's 2 taxpayers at a residence and they each want to fill this out. Bill can explain how that works. So page 1 is introduction. Page 2, we're looking for some respondent information and then some background. Again, the background is really just educational, helping people understand terms that we're familiar with. But as a community member, you don't talk about operational referendums or capital referendums all that often. So it's trying to help people understand what these terms are that we're using, as well as the bottom of this page is designed to help share information on the phases of the long-range facility plan. Demographic information is on page 3. Near the top, you go down, you can see some additional information there. Page 4, again, is designed to show the situation that exists and what we are specifically honing in on this phase. So there's a lot of information that we could have put on this particular page, and we had some different versions of this as we were drafting the document, but we decided to focus on what in particular is connected to phase 2 of this plan. So that's what you see on this page is background for the community. The main key feedback on the plan is surrounding the location of the middle school. So we are providing 2 pathways, as we're calling it, pathway 1, pathway 2, around the site for middle school. And then at a high level, that pathway is explained to the community, again, requesting their feedback at the bottom of this page. The next page is all about heritage. So asking for feedback from the community on the Heritage Elementary School topic. The next page is the operational referendum question. And again, Joan, you can see that we've got the 3 questions instead of the 4 that we had last time. The funding conversation, the topic of a consistent tax rate across time is the topic of this page, as well as the feedback question at the bottom. And then really the wrap-up page. So that's really a quick tour of the 9-page survey. And before I open it up, I'm going to just ask the author, Bill Foster, connecting with us via Zoom, anything, Bill, on this quick tour that you think should be pointed out or that you want to share before we open it up to just get feedback or comments from the board members?
Yeah, just a couple of things quickly. Again, thanks for having me tonight. Oh, can you hear me?
Try it now, Bill.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So just one point of clarification. This is going to be an 8-page survey. It's printed on 211 by 17 sheets of paper. It'll be, they call it stitched in the printing world. I call it stapled. It'll get mailed flat like a little book. We did create, there's actually 2 page 2s right now. So Steve went through that. Both of those pages had demographic information on the top. And one of the difference between those 2 pages, one does include the communication question, one does not. And if we do not include it, then we lose the graph that helps explain that the board's goal has been to maintain a consistent mill rate. So I feel very strongly both ways. I like the graph because it helps support the narrative that this is what we're trying to do. I also like the communication question. So one question for the board tonight is, do we want, which page 2 do you like? Then we'll be back down to an 8-page survey. Just a general comment about the survey is there's a lot of stuff there. It's packed. There's a lot of important information, and we are limited to 8 pages. So I did read a couple people had made some comments about, it might flow better this way or that way, and it's true, but we're really limited to 8 pages. So that's kind of I try to optimize the design based on the space limitation that we have. So I guess that's just a general comment. So maybe we can start on page 1, or if the board has feedback on which page 2 they like better, either way.
Thank you, Bill. I missed pointing out that there were 2 different page 2s because Dave, we did get that feedback from you on the question. The tax rate graph is really replicated again at the end where we share information to the community. So I think both page 2s work, but if you're looking for that information, that question from the last time, the page 2 that does not have the graph. So what Bill was mentioning is this graph here on the tax rate consistency over time was then removed for the other version, which had the question here, how would you like to receive your information? And so there's alternatives for this page. But we did want to build this in, Dave, based on your feedback. And keep in mind that this graph does reappear at the end of the survey with just a yellow bar indicating what it would look like moving forward into the future. So we do get the point across of this consistent tax rate, but we had it originally designed to get that point across twice. So do the board members prefer to go page by page? Do you prefer just to jump around? We're willing to do whatever your preference is to kind of jump around the survey.
So my general comment on it, you know, it's like you said, it's filled with information and it seems really confusing, like just the general person looking at it. You know, you have a survey, you use that question 1, this. And when you go through it, it doesn't really jump out yet. You see it. See, when you get to those, they're highlighted in gray. But I think it's just visually confusing. Just from a quick take of it. A lot of information, it's all good.
Yeah, that definitely has been a theme that we've received, Ted, is that there is a lot of information. And as a team putting the survey together, we even struggled getting it down to what you see because there's so much behind the story, right? There's phase 1 of what was already completed. There's phase 3 of what yet needs to be done. There's phase 2 as far as what we're seeking feedback on now. And so we were trying to figure out what was the best way to communicate all this information. And it was challenging, definitely challenging. Bill, can you comment about kind of how this compares to your other work that you're doing with schools and the organization, and any thoughts on Ted's comments?
Yeah, so I would say probably 90% of the surveys we do are 8-page surveys. This might be a little bit more text heavy than the average survey, but the other thing to keep in mind is the majority of the folks will be doing it online. And when you do it online, our software supports going from page to page to page. And it's, I think, easier to navigate. It's a little less onerous. So it'll be easier online than it is on paper, if that helps. But I'd say it's a pretty typical survey. And at the other thing is you do have a complex project in that you need to be testing both the capital referendum, components of the capital referendum, as well as an operational referendum. So just kind of by definition, there is a lot of moving parts that we have to cover. So there's going to be a fair amount of text to accomplish that. But I think people will engage. I think they'll take it. I think the vast majority of folks will read it critically. I'm not too concerned about that.
Other questions or comments? Joan?
On the, the second page 2, where we have the communication question, is that question just general communication from the school district, or is it specific to the referendum?
Well, right now it's written general. And I think what we've learned is it really doesn't change if you get specific about the referendum or just in general. I think people answer it the same way.
I would like to know from the 2014 survey, you changed the age categories by a year. If we moved it 2 more years, I'd be able to stay in the same previous age category. I'd feel better.
We'll work on that. Actually, what we've done is we've standardized the age across all our community surveys, and that gives us the ability to do some comparison analysis from district to district against the age question. So that's actually, that has changed and it has been standardized so we can do that additional analysis.
Maybe we want to start, Steve, with just trying to determine which page 2 you like. So there's the one, the initial one that had the
Can you
tax
scroll
rate
to?
consistency.
Yeah.
It's this one.
Then the other one had the insertion of the how do you want to receive your information? So those are your general two changes, and then just from a space standpoint is why you had to make the trade-off.
And so here's the graph. In the first version of page 2, again, it's repeated at the end with an additional year. And then in order to free up the space for this question, we remove the graph. Just as a reminder, the graph that came back at the end, it's much larger. It has the same information, except it adds the word proposed, so the community can see the consistency across time. So we do bring it back. And so either option we like, it's just a matter of, does this question provide us with value in asking it?
I think it actually does, because when you look back at 2014, there was such a pronounced difference in what people, how people wanted to receive information, even especially between non-parents and parents. And I think that's helpful considering, you've seen the last 2 years, we've got a lot of comments about how people have said they have or haven't received information. I think it helps us decide where we need to concentrate on to make sure those two different groups are getting what we need to get to them. Does anybody else have a
But
preference?
to your point there, if you don't have kids in the school, am I gonna get email?
It's just like this. You would be getting this whether you have kids or not. There's other information the school district might put out that you would get whether you had kids or not, right? On a regular basis.
Yeah, there will be mailings that we would do, for example, that we've done in the past that would go to all households.
Is it going to impact what you do? Because people are gonna answer all kinds of different things. I'm just wondering if it changes anything you do, getting the answers to those questions.
Well, I mean, looking back at 2014, you saw email among parents was 85%, but among non-parents, it was only like 20%. But the Waunakee Tribune was 53% for non-parents, but for parents, it was only 20%. So if you're going to do a notification that you want to get to the whole district, the Waunakee Tribune actually does better for non-parents. But if you want to talk to parents, it's better to use email. I mean, there's stark differences in how one group wanted it versus another and whether they were going to notice it. I think that does make a difference. And text messaging was horrible in all groups. And so was school board meetings, which was next to last.
So really, if you're gonna send something to all of the people, to hit all the people, it's more than likely gonna be district mailing, Tribune, or email.
I think you're gonna get kind of multiple approaches when you send things out like that. You're gonna
Right.
get the email, primarily our parents' emails and some broader ones. Tribune's gonna be a piece that will continually connect in with. Social media really wasn't a big piece we had in 13, 14. We've got some more options there. We do have to do mailings just to make sure we get things out to all the households. So there's gonna be a multifaceted approach to get information out.
To Ted's point, are you gonna change your strategy with the information that you get in that question? You're still gonna do the, you're still gonna get the Tribune, you're still gonna get the direct mail if you wanted to go to everybody. You got an email list with students.
Right, it seems you're still gonna do a multifaceted thing anyway, so. But you could eliminate one of them, yeah, text messaging, that ain't happened, but we already, seems like maybe that's already decided.
I think I agree with I agree with Jack and Ed on this one. I mean, I think they're gonna do it anyway. I think it's space that could be used better on this survey and not even include it on there. That they can know from experience how, what you can do. And you're gonna put a link, or if you need more information, go through, you know, stuff on the website. So I don't think it's needed at all.
Well, I think it helps provide focus, but if the majority don't want it, well then.
Well, again, there's a lot of information there. And I don't think it's gonna change the way that we.
So you go to the other version, just keep in mind, again, it provides us with an additional opportunity to help explain to the public this concept right in here, which we come back to towards the end of the survey. We keep the graph in. It talks about the goal of the board has been to maintain a consistent mill rate or tax rate across time. And so I know, Bill, the reason why you like this is it really helps that message, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, otherwise, there's a lot of text on that page, and having the graph there will draw people's attention to that. Everyone likes the picture. They're going to try to understand it, then it's more likely than not that they'll actually read that third paragraph. And I think that is a key to this whole strategy of what you're proposing, as well as testing as this consistent mill rate. That's why I like having that chart here, because I think it will increase people's awareness of it. And arguably that might be more valuable than having the communication question. I think communication is valuable. I think it will be used and usable, but at the same time, I also agree you're probably going to deploy strategies with every communication mode that you have. So I feel very strongly both ways. No, I would probably lean towards keeping the graph. I think that that's probably more important in this project's case, if I had a vote.
Absent any additional feedback, we will plan on moving forward with this version of page 2.
Okay.
And then as we move forward to the next page, as I talked earlier, we were trying to boil down a significant amount of data from Mark Roffman's report and trying to focus in on what was most applicable to phase 2 of this project, which is really communicating about the enrollment growth. The middle school, which is the building according to our enrollment projection that would need to be constructed first, the critical maintenance issues, and then heritage. So we certainly could have talked about a variety of other issues that are going to come at some point, like the expansion of the intermediate school, the creation of the high school campus. But we felt that focusing in on this phase of the referendum is what made the most sense. So that's what you see here, is the focus on those specific topics that are related to phase 2 of the referendum. Then we moved on to the middle school location. And both of those pathways then describe at a high level what would occur based on, under pathway 1, build a new middle school at the Heritage Elementary School site. Pathway 2 is going with a new site on the outer edges of Waunakee, meaning it's not going to be within walking distance of the high school. That's the main difference. So you've got that pathway 1 and that pathway 2. And for those of us who have been in the community for quite some time, we remember all of the discussion around the location of the high school, which was a primary driver of 3 referendums in a previous time frame. So that's why the location question is really designed to ask for feedback on pathway 1 or 2. And then that is the question at the bottom of the page. But do any board members have questions about what these pathways look like, or about this question in general?
So again, when I look at the, why, if you build it on the outskirts of town, and we've been talking about building it at the intermediate site, right? On Woodland, why is it $10 million or $11 million more to do that? We've got the land, you know, so it's not like we're putting, and I would assume that it's gonna be a similar building. Either or, you know, obviously if you're trying to get these, you know, if that assumption is right, what you're doing is really directing people to build the heritage on the heritage site.
So what Jack's referencing right here is this estimate and this estimate under pathway 2. Okay, so the new middle school under pathway 1 versus the new middle school under pathway 2. So Jay, you can help correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a couple of differences between the two. Pathway 2 builds in the cost of a new site. So the reason why pathway 2 builds in the cost of a new site is with citing a potential middle school at the intermediate school site, which Randy reviewed during the community engagement session. The fit didn't allow for the construction of what you would typically see at a new middle school, meaning like a competitive track and or football fields. And so therefore, the new middle school would not have those amenities that you typically would build in your middle school. So the price of pathway 2 includes a site that would be large enough to both construct a track, a field, and everything that you would expect to see at a new middle school.
Where
Where
would
would
you put that site?
Those
Those are the primary differences. It's the whole idea of if you're not in the, near the center of town, you don't have close proximity to those pieces. So then would you need to recreate some of those spaces at a new location if it was in order to prevent really the transportation mess of trying to transport kids in and out between the outskirts of town into a place that has those amenities. So that's the concept.
So Jay, is that accurate?
Yep,
Land,
that's totally accurate. There's land, infrastructure costs, there's a little bit of an additional site cost to develop the track and fields.
So basically, we're not even considering putting the middle school on the heritage, or
On the intermediate side.
on the intermediate side. We're not even considering that here because you're,
Right now, it's identical. That is a piece that right now is not on there, Jeff. No. The one next to the intermediate school, we took a look at that from the perspective of how it actually sat within that site, and then looking at some of the other traffic flow issues, et cetera. We kind of moved away from that to either the heritage site or an alternative site. Now, does it fit as far as physically fit there? I think it does, but it doesn't have maybe some of the pieces that it's not going to be the type of fit I think that we're happy with.
I mean, I think if you look at the exact cost breakdown from the two in the first packet, in the actual referendum total packet where we have the budget breakdowns on all the buildings, you're seeing about $7 million for land cost. So even if you did buy land and you went and stuck it at the other one and you had to do the performance stuff and all the other parts, even without buying new land, you're still looking at $4 million more between the two projects. So if you decide to stick it next to the intermediate school, you're still going to be spending $4 million more just because, and if you look at the cost breakdowns, it's about the fact of having to deal with your performance spaces and fields. And the bad thing is, I don't know how you build an athletic field out at the intermediate school. You can't. There's nothing there. Which means you're still gonna have to buy land maybe adjacent to it, or have to expand something in order to have that. I mean, just
Well, there's
think about
really-
middle school using the pool alone.
But when you look at that middle school site, you got a 300-meter track. So are we gonna keep a 300-meter track? You know, that's not even a standard track. But can you put a 400-meter track on this site?
On the current heritage site,
On the current heritage site?
I guess we haven't really looked at that. We kind of were looking, I think, at keeping the 300-meter track there, because right now that's a practice field. When they run their main track, it's they're running out on the larger high school track, which helps with that. That's kind of the adjacency piece. So right now, all of our middle school activities, those outdoor practice activities move down the road. That's really why we were looking at that. It doesn't necessarily have to be a 400-meter competition, high school grade track that goes in there. But it definitely would have to be something that would be there for us to kind of keep some efficiencies in program.
Fine. Let's move on.
Okay, so that's the main theme of this page. The next page is surrounding the topic of heritage. Talking about in the middle of the page, if the community supports rebuilding, replacing, there's 3 potential locations. So this option is really kind of diving deeper, it's specifically into heritage is really what this whole page is about. Because obviously this overall planning process is about the middle school and heritage. So that's why the survey is designed around those 2 main buildings. You notice in the survey, we don't really ask a lot about some of the minor remodeling that we were talking about at the high school, or minor remodeling we were talking about Bethel Circle, or some of the critical maintenance needs. We're focusing in, again, because we have 8 pages, we're focusing in on the middle school and heritage. And so this is the heritage page that really talks about the different pathways and how that connects to heritage. And seeking feedback from the community regarding the heritage site.
I think the biggest challenge you're gonna have, you know, everybody's talking about the fields, you know, the play surfaces and things like that. You know, if we need to expand this, is there room to expand? You know, you're on a footprint that, you know, you're landlocked.
To expand, which version are you talking about?
No, I'm just talking, you know, out. You know, if you need to put more space, more rooms, you know, on that middle school, on that heritage site, you know, you're eating into your applying to this.
I think the size school that they're looking at the middle school site, that the middle school concept that we have out there right now, I believe it's a 900 student middle school. So it's not, when we built the intermediate school, we built it for one size then to be added on to. For the middle schools, we built a larger one to give there's room to grow into. I believe it's built off of a model of 900 students.
Yeah, 900 students, 232,000 square feet.
Oh, Joan, yes.
Did we ever determine what the acreage of our heritage site is in comparison to the acreage that we have on it?
Yes, Robin, who's on the Zoom, did that for us. I don't know if you have that handy, Robin, or can look it up, others I can get into my email. Chelsea,
I can pull it up. I don't have it on hand at the moment, but I can get it pretty quick.
Yeah, Robin, would you mind just taking a minute and pulling that up?
Yeah.
So Robin did that for us, so she can. Robin also did some research into site sizes for various schools that she certainly would be able to comment on. So we'll just give you a minute, Robin, to find that. And while you're looking for it, I'll just scroll on to the next page that talks about an operational referendum, again, to introduce the community to the concept that typically with a referendum, you have a capital question and an operational question. And then it has 3 questions for, would you support questions associated with that operational referendum question. The first one is, would you support referendum funding to retain high quality staff? Second one, would you support referendum funding to operate new spaces and or buildings? Third one, would you support referendum funding to replace the funding sources to maintain current programs and services related to the one-time funding sources that we have currently in our budget? So 3 questions regarding the operational referendum compared to the 4 questions in the last version that you saw. Robin? Go ahead, Jack.
An interesting.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Robin.
So Arboretum, you have, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Arboretum is 12.6. Heritage is 17.6. Prairie is 20 acres. The intermediate site is 40 acres total. Middle school, high school, and TLC combined is 78.7 acres. The property you own out on Peaceful Valley Parkway in Woodland is 24 acres. And then you have 3.2 for Bethel Circle.
Repeat what that was for the heritage site, Robin.
Heritage site, I was getting 17.6 acres. There is a discrepancy between the GIS site that the city uses and what I can scale off of this, the survey by about an acre. So, but I think the 17.6 is the more accurate number.
So we're saying that Heritage can fit a middle school at 17.6, but Woodland at 24 can't.
Heritage has some, well, and maybe Steve, you want me to answer that, or?
What? Go ahead, Robin. Yeah.
Okay, there's just a few things and everybody else can weigh in as well, but the Heritage site is not an ideal size for a middle school, but given the fact that it's close proximity to the high school, it does have some advantages. The Woodland site, we are going to look at doing a test fit on there. It's larger, but if you do want a full competition track and full football field out there so that it's not being bused back and forth to the high school, then that obviously takes a bit more square footage or acreage, let's say.
It's the proximity piece to the high school that allows you to get away with it being a smaller site. Because you really only have to then articulate where the actual building goes, because you have some of those pieces exist behind it where the school's not going to extend to it. And then you have pieces just a block away, as opposed to being at a further distance away, of which you can't build those out on those sites with this given the size. And then it creates a transportation piece back in the town. Those are the concepts that we kind of talked about. This is a conversation that kind of goes back to early 2012.
And just for the board members to know, we did talk at our core team meeting this past week about, you've seen a fit of a middle school at the intermediate site. Our EUA and Vogel team are going to take a look at being able to show you what a fit would look like at the South Woodland site. So you can see what that would actually look like. Because obviously that's currently district owned and we have not gone through that exercise, but are intending to do that. So you could see what would be possible at a site that the district already owns.
There are some unknowns at that site that if the board decides to go down the path of building on the outer outskirts of town. I think any site that's being considered would have to get a land survey, wetland delineation, and some soil borings just to truly understand what parts are buildable on that site.
Yeah, we saw that at the intermediate site, already pretty hard.
Joan, does that answer your question then from Robin?
And are you gonna go through the ideal acreage? Said she.
Oh,
did
yeah.
acreage?
Yeah, we've got that in the request for proposal for land, which is a different agenda item.
Oh, okay.
But I could ask Robin to jump into
We
it
can
because
do it then.
she gave it to us. Do you want to just share it, Robin?
Yeah, it's generally, sorry, do you have a bad internet connection? So please let me know if I'm not coming through. Elementary schools are generally 10 acres plus 1 acre for every 100 students, middle for every 100 students. And then high schools are generally recommended to be 30 acres with 1 acre for every 100 students addition.
I didn't hear the middle school.
20 acres plus 1 acre for every 100 students.
Thank you.
Any questions on the operational referendum page? Otherwise, I'll scroll.
One of the questions that would be kind of interesting is, to pose to the community is, would you prefer a operational referendum that goes forever, or do you want to see a sunset?
The-
That would be an interesting question.
Right, there are communities, Nicolay in the Milwaukee area as an example, that's their board's philosophy, is to have operational referendums that you continually go back to the public to ask that question. So there are different approaches to that question. Historically, when we have had an operational referendum tied to a capital question, we've had questions that have been permanent in nature. That's different than what we did in 2020 for the referendum for the 2.1 million, which was 5 years in nature. Bill, can you comment on a question of that nature and what that might look like, and whether you've been having a question like that in other surveys?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. We really haven't asked that. I guess really it would go back to the board, and I think you'd have to say, if you need it forever and ever, how do you know you need it forever and ever? You'd have to be prepared to defend that. I think arguably there are expenses that are going to go on forever and ever. The difficult thing is you can't say with a high degree of certainty that you know what the governor's budget's going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now, much less 2 years from now. So that's the dilemma, and that's the hard part to put into the survey. I suspect if you put it in there, more often than not, people would come back and say we would like to see a sunset as opposed to on infinitum. So I probably wouldn't ask it. I would leave it up to the board and decide if the board feels that it's prudent to ask for a recurring, then go ahead and put it on the ballot and ask for it. Or conversely, if you feel that a sunsetting or non-recurring operating referendum is the best approach, then ask for that. That would be my advice, and not to put that in the survey. Most people in the community don't even know it exists, and then certainly haven't thought critically of it.
I mean, we've had a bit of this discussion before about recurring versus non-recurring. But if you look at a non-recurring one and say you put the 5-year sunset on it, the items we're talking about here don't have a sunset. I mean, if you look at number 1 and you decide a salary to affect salaries in order to retain staff, what do you do 5 years from now if that referendum doesn't pass again? Cut everybody's pay? I can't imagine what would happen with the school district and morale at that point. Or number 2, you're talking about funding for additional building that you built, and then all of a sudden you cut the funding to run the heat and the lights the next year. What do you do then? I mean, like, our last referendum, we talked seriously about the maintenance part of the budget and putting dedicated money to that. Would you really want to sit there and see your maintenance budget drop by that much every 5 years?
They've,
Or up or down?
you know, we've talked about the $2 million. And, you know, if there was a way to say, we're gonna put $2 million a year into Fund 40, so that we can use it for that, I'd support it. But, you know, you can't do that because you can't tie future boards, you know, to that. And then you're just going in a circle saying, okay, today we all agree that, hey, $2 million, you know, 5 years from now, something else happens so that, you know, future boards can spend it however they want to. And then you're right back to the same situation that you are today, where you go out and you ask for referendum dollars for major maintenance. So it's not a practical, you know, while in principle I support that, it's not a practical solution to solve your maintenance challenges.
Well, that's just one of the 3 items though I mentioned. I mean, which item would you decide to sit there and say, next year, we're just gonna possibly lose $2 million out of the entire budget, and now you're running around cutting problems? I mean, if you're gonna build the building, you've got to fund the building. And if people are gonna agree to see that compensation for staff is an important item they're willing to pay for, what happens when you hit that point where it stops and you lose a referendum, which has happened and will happen in the future? You create such a big negative black hole that you've committed to that next day, that I think you're throwing the district up and down on the effects of that.
So if I could just jump in, I think what Bill was communicating was, if you like the 3 questions, get the feedback from the community, and then the board should have that discussion about how you would actually structure that question. Does that make sense to everybody? Are those the 3 questions that you would want to have on this topic? So you can get that feedback back, and then ultimately keep in mind the time frame from May to August is fundamentally the board doing this work and really having the type of discussions you just started having. So do you feel comfortable with Bill's suggestion that that should be a board discussion after you have the answers from the public on these 3 questions?
Well, you know, I guess it should be a board, but, you know, to your point, you know, nobody's got a crystal ball. We've been growing like crazy. You know, what happens if, you know, things, you know, go in the opposite direction, you know, where instead of putting in 80 students, you know, 80 students a year, 30 students a year, you're now putting a negative 50 students in. You know, this goes on forever.
Well, I mean, the
So-
board has to approve the survey at the next meeting, right? So if you want to make the motion to add that question to the survey, then we do that there, and it's either a majority of the board wants the question or they don't. I mean, I don't think we don't have to decide it right now, but we definitely have to decide it at the board meeting. So it should be brought up to give that option.
We don't have a lot of flexibility at the board meeting to make huge changes. It's substantial. And a tweak of a question here, there's probably not the ability to do it much, but that's kind of, I believe, what we have within our space time.
So you're saying if they want that question, we should decide it now.
We should get some direction so we can bring that forward. I mean, if it can be a piece. That's kind of what we were hoping to get tonight, is as much feedback as possible. So we can rework it, bring it back, and you can see what we would see as generally the final draft when you would approve in March. You can see it in March, and there's some minor tweaks. We have some flexibility to deal with that, but we can't do major changes.
And remember,
State the
Bill,
question. Who's the first? Who stated it?
Well, maybe you don't say it as a sunset, but, you know, how does the taxpayer have the ability, you know, if you're doing a good job, this community will support it. Right? You know, if you're not doing a good job, the community gets up in arms.
Bill, can you jump on for a minute?
Sure.
How much room do we have to fit something in on this page?
Well, we've got room for this question if you want to ask it. Again, I would not recommend asking it, but there's room to say, and you know, if it will make the survey longer, and I think make it more confusing because it's an if then. If the community does support funding for 1, 2, or all 3 of these items, it can be structured in one of 2 different ways. One is, you know, then you have to go in, not only explain operating referendum, but then within operating, you have the recurring or non-recurring. And I think if we were to take it out and focus group that, I suspect we'd have 90% of the folks in the audience say, I don't understand this. And then you don't get very good data back. So I can certainly write the question. I just would not recommend it because I don't think people will be able to wrap their minds around it to give you good data. So I'll certainly write the question though, if you want to see it.
Any other board members have a comment?
I don't think we should entertain or a sunset referendum in this category. Operational, these expenses are reoccurring, they'll go on forever. Even if we stop growing as a district, we need that money for those expenses. I don't support that.
I agree, Joe. I think there's just too much already proposed and committed development around all 4 sides of Waunakee that I think will continue to grow for the next decade or so.
Do you want to make a motion to recommend it, Jack? And then
I would like to at least see the question. I make the motion to see the question.
is there a second?
See the question. So that we can agree.
We could write it, we could drop it into the survey, and then at the next meeting, you'll see it appear on this page. And then we can
I'll
decide.
second that.
Would Bill?
Yep.
Would it be easier to write the question in and then we could delete it if we wanted to? That's probably easier than trying to draft it next month.
It would be so and I can write it. So you're going to just ask again. The logic is if people would support 1, 2, or all 3 of these, how should we structure it? And then I'd have to define both recurring and non-recurring, and then try to ask a question against it. So I can write that.
Okay.
I think that's what we're looking for, is to write it, Bill, and then drop it in here so we can take a look at it in March and then give a thumbs up or a thumbs down after we see it.
Okay. I guess the other thing for the board just to reflect on is, do you believe as a board you are in a better position to make that decision, or by asking the question you're somewhat advocating your, you know, if everybody comes back and agrees one way or the other, and you don't agree with that, then you know, then it goes to don't ask the question you don't want the answer to, I guess. So if you're comfortable with the community making that decision, then we can, you know, I'll go ahead and write it. But that's, I guess, the part B to the, if you want it in there, then you do have to honor the community's wishes. Some food for thought.
Yeah.
We say we have a lot of the board here. We want to go to work at putting that in. It's not passing.
Well, unfortunately, only 3 people are allowed to vote at this meeting. All board members are allowed to speak, but only 3 have voting power. So It's,
Judy, what was your comment?
I'm saying, I can't vote, but if you know that you don't have the support of the board, why put the question in?
I mean, procedurally, I think I'm right, Randy?
Procedurally.
Okay. So the procedure here is, we all get to speak, say that, and the 3 members who are allowed to vote here can take that into account or not, and then vote what they want to recommend.
Also, you have a motion in a second. Did you second it?
I did
Yeah.
second.
All right, that's it. So you have a motion in a second.
Any more questions or comments? Those in favor of adding the question, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. So the motion passes to add the question, so the board can see it next month.
Yeah, we will do that and it will be written in your board book for the next meeting. So you will see it before the meeting. So we will get that done.
I'd like to bring up one, this is minor, that could probably go either way. But I hate having a question that isn't clear. And when I look at the retained staff question, I mean, it makes it clear in the writing that it says this is basically about raising staff salaries since we're below or at average. But then the question says, would you support referendum funding to retain high quality staff? I think we should be absolutely clear that it's, would you support referendum funding for salaries to retain high quality staff? But that's what the money's going for, not something else to retain staff, but specifically it's about salaries. So I think we should be very clear with the question and let the public know exactly what the plan is so that they can answer it. I just think it's too vague the way it's written.
Bill, can you comment?
We add for salaries to both recruit and retain, would that be, because I think
Oh,
that
no,
would
that's
be
even-
how that
that's
money
probably
would
even
be.
better. That's
Okay,
good,
I will do that.
unless someone has a problem with it. Any other questions on this page?
Does the recruit change? I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with what you commented on.
Well, yeah, but I think it's part of the whole discussion we've had about salaries is about, we sometimes get people we want to offer and they jump to somebody else because they pay more. So it's about not just retaining staff, but it's also about recruiting staff. So if we add the wording, would you support funding for salaries to recruit and retain staff, right? That's even more clear. Does that make sense?
Yep, I guess to Bill's point, be prepared to follow through if they say no.
Yeah, that's what we're gonna have to take into consideration, just like the last survey. Any other questions on this page? Then the last one is about the mill rate. We've sort of covered this a little bit already in the incredible breadth. Any questions on this one? Then the last thing is, does everybody agree with the return address? Is that okay? That's good. Okay. All right, so there, we got through one item on the agenda already. Great. Item number 2.
You got what you need there, Steve?
You good?
Robin, can you hang on for the RFP for land discussion as well?
Sure, I can do that.
Okay. You want to go over this? Steve?
I'm gonna go back to the. Kelsey, help me out, please. We'll go back to the agenda. Thank you. All right, so the next topic is really the topic that, first of all, this committee recommended to the board at the last board meeting to request approval of a request for proposal process for a land purchase. Since this meeting was so close to the last one, I just took the opportunity to include that in this agenda for your feedback. So basically, I've drafted up a request for proposal for land and included it in the packet. Robin helped construct the most important information. I'll make this a little bit larger. The most important information is really regard a couple of different things. In this section, the scope, we specifically indicate a site capable of constructing a new middle school with the acreage that Robin already shared, and or a site capable of constructing a new elementary school. Because as you know, the plan for Mark Roffers included a 4th elementary school at some point, potentially in this decade. This request for proposal does not include, as an example, a site for a high school. So we're trying to be as clear as we can to the community about what it is that we'd be looking for a response on. So we've got information here about a middle school and an elementary school. The other point that's important to note is we've included a special note that the responses that a family may provide to the board is considered closed session negotiations of the school board per Wisconsin state statutes. That's included in here. That's a big difference. And we normally do a request for proposal. Now, if we're doing a request for proposal on paper bids, the next day a community member can walk in and say, can you show me those proposals? This is different. So we've got a public presentation tonight of the proposal. We will publicly advertise this information, but once a response is received, we're letting the individuals know it will be shared with the school board in closed session for potential negotiations. If and when the school board would negotiate an agreement to purchase a vacant site, I am noting that said agreement will require public approval through the annual meeting process and funding approval through a public referendum. So this process can lead, if negotiations are successful, to a public process. But the negotiations component is a closed session discussion, which is a little different than most of our RFPs. Anything to add, Randy?
No, I think that covered it well.
So just looking for feedback, if you think there's anything else that you would like to have included, I certainly could make any changes before this goes out.
Looks good.
I have some question on the acreage mainly. I mean, we look at Arboretum that's sitting at 14 acres. And how many students are roughly at Arboretum?
Little over 400.
Little over 500. And we say Arboretum space-wise is bad, roughly, just as a general statement. I mean, Prairie is great because it's got 20 acres and has 600 students, roughly 660 or something. And it helps us because like the boys lacrosse plays there, right? Or practice. Right, and we are able to use that. I'm just concerned that if we put out a 15-acre minimum, or maybe there should just be a statement that, you know, lots, you know, acreages larger than these minimums would also be considered. In other words, we don't want to just see 15. We want to be able to see what a 20 might cost us, and it might be a better use for the district. Then I don't want to get trapped with another Arboretum.
You don't want to, what you're looking at is you don't want just a bid on 15 or 30 acres.
Right.
If somebody has 55 acres, you want to see that.
Well, maybe. We'll probably turn down 55, but I think you would seriously consider 20 for an elementary school. Just because, I mean, you go and see the operations there. Prairie's great and how it handles stuff where Arboretum is problematic. And I don't know, a 500, when you're saying 15 and 1 per 100, I don't see a 500 elementary school. I mean, they're going to be 6+.
I don't think it detracts from those that are gonna have that, though, if they come forward.
Well, when you see RFPs, I don't know, I'm looking at most construction RFPs, they're very specific. You hit the minimum because it's a price point. you're not always looking to say, well, if I give them a bunch extra and run the price up on them, they're more likely to pick me. Nope. You're worried the price gets,
So
it's
why
all
don't we
about the
just,
price
uh,
tag.
Why don't we just go with a minimum of 20 acres? if you want?
I think for an elementary school, that's definitely one issue, is 20 acres is practically a minimum now. I mean, would you want to build another arboretum versus building a prairie? Prairie's definitely been absorbing a lot of our elementary growth for years.
We could easily make the elementary 20, and set it as a minimum of 20.
What do you think?
And a minimum of 40 acres for the middle.
What did we say was the ideal acreage for the middle? And 20 plus
20.
1 per 100?
Yeah, 30.
30, that would be 1,000 students. Yeah.
But a little
so
extra land is, it's 10 acres.
It's basically a very limited fact.
Yeah, so, bump up the elementary and bump up the middle school to 40 acres.
I'm a little worried though that we're starting to get to the point of, if you are going to make it cost prohibitive. I mean,
What are we looking
I
at?
think
as
20
far
is a reasonable number. When you looked at the estimates on the construction and about buying land, that's where your gun was.
But we do have green space issues. We've got every green space on our facilities, plus we're using the village's facilities. You're talking about increasing, we're gonna continue to increase. You're probably gonna have an expansion in the future on this, so you're gonna eat into some of that property. So you're just, setting up future boards for success. Oh, we had success when the previous board bought the woodland, with 40 acres.
I think that
And, at the end of the day, as this community builds up, these 20 or 40 acre sites are gonna be more of a challenge, and you're gonna be moving farther away from, your centralized operations, which right now it's relatively centralized.
I'd be comfortable with the 20 and the 30. I'm worried 40, if you put that as the absolute minimum, you start pricing yourself out of wanting to do it.
What's the price per acre going for these days?
Still very widely, depending on whether someone believes that the developer is also in the mix to buy the property, or a family preference not to sell the developer. I mean, I would expect, there is a question on here about that. I would expect we'll receive a wide range.
So we go from 15 to 50.
And comments at all about a range.
That's doing math in my head. I mean, we were at about, I think the budget we put together, we're at $4 a foot. So what's that?
For land.
Yeah, it's like 200, is that right? Yeah, it was just under 200. About 7 million on, I think we had guessed 40 just for rough math on the middle school budget.
So that middle school, you were figuring out how much acreage was that for?
We essentially said if you were to buy the intermediate site again today, you had to provide infrastructure and all the site costs that you had to out there for the intermediate construction. What would that look like?
That was 8 million roughly on your.
Yeah, it was set.
Yeah, and that was with all the infrastructure. and everything.
It was 8.5 with the infrastructure and just.
And you were figuring about.
That's 40 acres,
So
cheaper than I would have thought.
But again,
But who knows
that's
tomorrow?
us just plugging a number. Ultimately, the market's gonna come tell you.
Yeah.
And if you say 40 here and somebody's got 30, it's still probably gonna respond. So.
Right.
I've got 30. I'm willing to sell it for. And then we can make that decision too.
Any thoughts, Ted?
I got 18, and it's like, oh, if they said 15 was good, and it's fine, I don't care. More's better, I guess.
Can we put a track on your tractor?
I don't personally have, I just said it.
Oh. I thought you meant you personally had it too.
No,
So
but I
we
mean,
want-
you're
what do you want to
15
sell it
in here,
for?
it's like, I up to 20, it's like, oh darn, I had 18, and, oh, it's right in the ideal spot here. Like, no, it's 18, sorry.
Make sure to put it in a blind trust and then you can sell it. to
Now
us.
we can put it in the 400-meter track.
Yeah, sorry, that's fine.
So I'm hearing a general consensus up to the 15 to 20. And I can add a statement, Jack, to the middle school that would say sites larger than 30 up to 40 will be reviewed by the board. Something just to clarify that larger is absolutely something we're willing to consider. Is that reasonable?
Is that fine? Okay. Otherwise, I think I didn't see anything else. Any other questions?
So the intent is to get this out as widespread as we can. So if any board members have any suggestions or ways to get this message out, feel free to let me know. Obviously, I'll work with Annie on communication of this. We're going to connect the public communication of this to also receiving quotes from folks on the minor remodeling here at Bethel Circle, so we can put it both on the paper at the same time. So if you run across anything as board members, just feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect or communicate with families in any manner that you think makes sense. So this will be going out right away this week. Kelsey, would you mind going back to the next agenda item? So capital maintenance projects. So just a little history that I wanted to share about this topic. So John has prepared a first draft of the 2022-2023 capital projects list. It's important for me to give a brief reminder to the school board that the board approved a change in funding for the capital maintenance projects. We will be utilizing Fund 41, the Capital Projects Fund, during this school year, the next school year, and the following school year until the funds are exhausted in Fund 41. Future capital maintenance projects will be reserved within Fund 10, the general fund, which accomplishes the goal of increasing our Fund 10 fund balance. This is all related to the discussion over the Moody's credit rating of our district that we talked through last spring. So just keep in mind that administration is implementing that change that the board approved last spring. We're seeking input on the project list. We are prioritizing projects that are unrelated to a potential November 2022 referendum. As an example, because the discussion at Heritage ranges as far as what may or may not happen with that site, you're not seeing us administratively recommend significant investments in the Heritage Complex. Now, if there are safety related issues or if there are equipment breakdowns, we are definitely going to be bringing those forward. But you're not seeing on here examples of replacing, large areas of carpeting or replacing windows until we can really understand where that referendum process takes us over the next several months. Projects could be forwarded for approval for the school board at the March board meeting, or this committee can certainly take another look at them and consider this a first draft, bring them back in April. I do want to turn this over to John, so John can get a chance to just talk a little bit about the process he's gone through, how he's communicated with principals, what this spreadsheet is set up to do. As an example, John has reflected some of your comments in prior years, Dave, about wanting to know where this is on the maintenance list. So I just want John to have a chance to just share, kind of this document, and then get your feedback on how you would like to see us move forward to either the March meeting or bring this back for April. John?
Thanks, Steve. So the colors, don't let that throw you off from last year's document. It helped me organize this document as far as some of the buckets that I'm putting, that I wrap these projects around. For example, the red being security and safety. Not that they're an emergency, nor the green less important, but that just helped me kind of categorize the sheet. I have this listed through, again, like Steve said, capital projects, Fund 41. And I tried to prioritize on the left-hand side, high, medium, and low. Quite a few things going on here. This list is actually quite narrowed down from the larger projects list that I have, and this only shows you 517K of approximately 2.8 million that I'm looking at on my desk currently. So again, just showing some of the things that float to the surface that we need to do year over year. The green shows some energy conservation projects. Again, the red is showing some safety and security projects that we'd like to do. The two there in the middle having to do with heritage. Because they don't have some locking capabilities in their gyms currently. And the older glass in that building has been a problem as of late with some kids. So otherwise, if you guys want me to go through each of these items, that's fine, or feel free to do you have questions on anything listed there? Or?
And just as a reminder, David brought up in the past, there's a column on here documented on facility maintenance plan. The district had gone through a pretty extensive process of identifying long-term facility maintenance needs. And Dave, you would ask to see, are the projects that we're bringing forward on that documented plan, yes or no? The column to the right talks about the remaining life. Is this like 4 years overdue, 6 years overdue, or where is this at? John does have a much larger list, as he referenced, which has $2 million worth of projects. And of course, before we pause the referendum conversation, John was working with Jay and others to kind of go through the extensive list of potential maintenance projects that exist. So there's a lot of work that's been done in this area. We're really boiling it down to the short term, which is the board's plan to utilize Fund 41 for the next couple of years, draw it down. That would be about $525,000 next year. And again, trying to really make sure this is connected with the larger referendum plan to make sure our investments are designed for the long term. John could have brought forward 5 times this list. And so this was his attempt to go through and try to put it into something that fit budgetarily for 1 year. We're looking for your feedback on whether you want a chance to look at this for another month, bring it back for the April meeting, or whether you're comfortable moving this forward in March. That's the type of feedback we're looking for as far as how you want to move ahead with this.
Any questions?
You feel these are your priority items? And
There are some that may, looking at, that aren't on the list. So that being said, these are the ones that float to the surface. There's so much more I couldn't fit it on with it. Again, the constraint of the dollar at the bottom.
I would make the motion then to move this forward.
Good.
Yeah, just looking for heritage stuff. Yeah, I'll second it.
Any questions on any specific item? So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? And that takes us to future meetings. You want a meeting after spring break?
Yeah, we definitely would request that this committee meet on a monthly basis, just due to the volume of what we're going to be bringing forward. So we would like to request after spring break, but before the April meeting.
Well, it'd be fun to have it after the policy committee again, but I think that might be a bit tight.
Yeah, that's too bad. Not the week before.
And we will be needing budget again as well, so if you have an interest in pairing meetings together, we can certainly do that. If you,
You're meeting what?
the budget will be meeting every month as well, so if you have an interest, Jack.
Yeah,
obviously,
let's,
pair it together.
April 6th?
Who's that Monday? Like to try to keep these on Monday night if possible.
Or
I can't do Monday. I can do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday of that week. Or the week before.
Monday, the week before, you can do it.
No, not Monday, because we have policy committee already and that community engagement meeting.
March 28th, we have a community. You could look at the 29th, 30th, 31st. Or you start looking at, so that doesn't work, you have the 5th. You do the 6th, I wouldn't be able to be there on the 6th, but there's a fashion.
I prefer Monday or Tuesday, so it can't be Monday or Tuesday.
I can't do Tuesday either. We'd have to do the 6th or 7th if you do that week. Otherwise, the Tuesday before would be fine.
And Jack, we don't have to connect the two. If you prefer to do the budget committee on like Monday the 4th, we can do that.
Yeah,
If that works better for you, and then we can do this one separately.
Pick a date, Steve, budget.
So Dave, you're referencing obviously
I could
not
do
available on the 4th
Tuesday,
or the
Wednesday,
5th.
or Thursday of the 29th, 30, 31.
Right, so does the 29th work?
Sure.
make it work.
What time?
5:30.
5:30? Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, stay here by your side.